My name is Camry, 63 years old. eBay lived long enough to know there are cities that never sleep, and there are houses that no longer breathe. My kitchen belongs to the latter, so clean it's silent, drawers that still glide, a refrigerator always full, and yet dinner keeps cooling with the passing years. I have two sons, Lasso and Humes, and if anyone asks what the work of my life is, I hold out those two names the way a carpenter lifts the table he joined with his own hands, plan, sturdy, full of fingerprints. Their father left when I was 30. I put a postcard on the doorstep printed with an Arizona desert scene, red buttes and a blinding white sky. On the back were a few scrawled words, I'm sorry. No explanation, no promise, just a dry period. That evening I made the usual potato casserole, set it on the table, and laid out 2 plates for the boys. The man's seat became a beautiful blank, the chair upright, the tabletop free of crumbs, the napkin folded neat. When I cleaned up, I suddenly found the water in the sink had the metallic taste of tears, the smell I would later recognize as the trace left by trust falling to the bottom. He was never taught to mother alone, but bills and installment schedules teach faster than any school. By day, I cleaned offices in the financial district. Afternoons I washed dishes at a family diner where the ding-ding of the doorbell beat like an old heart. At night I mended clothes on a dark wooden table pushed against the window, listening to freight trains growl into the depot at the far end of town. Some nights the needle slipped into my finger, a fine streak of blood smeared across the white seam. I propped my chin on my hand, exhaled, then threaded again. Gradually the wooden clothespins along the sill turned into hems, sighing with relief. Each time I finished a cut and stitch, I stacked them as tidily as I filed away the days they made it through. Lasso, the elder, always looked at the world with an invisible ruler. He measured the city by opportunities, people by connections, evenings by unanswered emails. Humes, by contrast, was born with a kind of silence that made others want to confide. My second son has a habit of smoothing the edge of the tablecloth before he starts to speak, as if the fabric's wrinkles also needed soothing first. When he was little, Humes asked me, Mom, why does the summer sky at 6 p.m. smell like bread? He laughed and said maybe the bakery up the block had the oven door open, but even now I think that question was like a key slipped into the bottle's lock. The child opened it a little and shut it again, while his mother stood inside breathing the scent of fermenting dough. He paid the bills on time. He kept the boys in shoes without holes, shirts with sharp creases, rooms with the newest baseball posters. I learned to answer the chores letters with concise sentences that didn't parade my struggle. And I learned something very American: don't make anyone uncomfortable with your sorrow. He always smiled in the Thanksgiving photos at the neighbors. I always brought a palm-sized apple pie. Those photos now sit in a clear plastic box under the bed, and whenever I pull it out I can hear the rustle of an old wave. When Lasso graduated, I bought him a cheap watch with a dull metal band. He put it on, then took it off, kissed my forehead, and said, "You keep it, for when you need it." He nodded, slipped the watch back into my coat pocket along with the unpaid electric bill. The first time he mentioned wanting a place of his own was on a dry night when the wind rasped the wall like sandpaper. He had my answer ready before he finished. How much? $20,000 was all I had scraped together over 2 decades, clipped into 3 passbooks. He signed for another $10,000 in my own name. 2 years, Mom, Lasso said. Those 2 years stretched like cold taffy and stuck to every call from the bank. By year 7, no one mentioned the debt anymore. Americans have a courteous way of forgetting inconvenient things. They put them in a gift box, tie a ribbon, and store them on top of the cupboard. Humes was different. When he talked about starting a business, his eyes opened slightly, like someone straining to remember an old tune. He saw myself in that. I too once had a tune like that, but it went out the 1,000th time I plugged in the kettle. He gave Humes $20,000 and again borrowed 10, no papers, no interest, only a motorsize on her child. Months later his company collapsed like scaffolding thrown up in haste. He held my son, his hair still smelled of sun. Then I went into the kitchen to wash a bowl that was already clean. After Lasso married, an elegant wedding with ivory ribbons and vineyard photos, I moved in with him and his wife, Mira. I was grateful for the invitation to live together, though deep down I knew it was their way of managing risk. The old soul didn't live alone. The house was 4 times the size of my old apartment. The kitchen had motion sensor lights, open the cupboard and every glass matched, none chipped. He bought 3 lavender pots for the window. Mira was sweet like a flawless speech. Just rest, Mom, Guille put everything on service. Don't do too much yourself. At our age, she said our age with a peculiar deftness, as though wrapping something fragile in tissue paper. Lasso was busy. His ties had a precise crease, shirts hung in a straight row, his shoes were polished so bright I could see myself pass, but that reflection always slid away. I learned my son's calendar the way people learn train timetables: 8 Zoom call, 12:15 lunch with a partner, 19 de boss's child's birthday party. I realized I was turning into a supporting character in someone else's life, then into the backdrop. Americans have a strange kind of pride too. If you become background, be a spotless one. The cane came on a Wednesday morning just after I watered the lavender a second time because the forecast said dry winds. It wasn't a punch, it was a hand tightening, then giving a slight twist, like someone screwing on a gap. I braced against the stone counter and saw dust motes glitter like salt. My vision narrowed to a thin strip. The dishwasher turned into the sound of water sliding across a far roof. He tried to call out, but the first name that leapt out was Mom, my mother, and of course is no longer here to answer. He went down, vaguely thinking they told Mira not to use too much olive oil in the dressing. When I opened my eyes, I saw the cold white light and naked straight lines of cardiology. The monitor beeped, with an impassive patience. A line went into my arm, a blood pressure cuff squeezed my left wrist in rhythm. A woman in green scrubs leaned in. "Fiona," said the tiny badge. "Hello," she said, voice like cotton wool. "Your heart stopped for a while in the ambulance, but we got it back. You're safe now." Then she bent lower and said a sentence that made me love her at once. "It's okay to feel afraid." Dr. Miller arrived, the broad-shouldered, overscheduled American middle-aged man whose eyes are soft with the fatigue of having delivered too much bad news. He spoke slowly, clearly, as if reading to a messy student. "Dube had a myocardial infarction. We called your 2 sons. He asked them to come immediately." He's immediately hovered between 2 beeps, then fell somewhere beyond the door. Fiona returned after a call. He watched a tiny pulse at her cheek. "Your family is busy," she said, picking her words with care. "Your elder son's wife's boss party is in the neighborhood. They say it's hard to leave. The younger is far away, everything son Lasso." Fiona lifted her shoulders, apologizing for someone else. He laughed, a dry crack like breaking a piece of old wood. He said, "Thank you," and closed my eyes, but in my head the stadium lights came on late at night. Everything instantly found its place. Humes arrived first the next noon. His wife, Diana, followed with a fruit basket arranged like a work of art, Granny Smith against red strawberries, a cascade of black grapes. "How do you feel, Ma'am?" Humes asked, holding my hand just long enough for a passerby to think it was love. "Tomorrow's Ma's second birthday," Diana said, lips curving into a pretty smile that didn't touch her eyes. "We'll do it at the Oaks Ballroom. Don't you worry about anything." In America, "don't you worry" often means, "please remove yourself from the frame." "We've been thinking," Humes rushed on, as if to stay ahead of my reaction, "assisted living might be good for you. Safer, better care. We work, and sometimes," I watched the round green tracings on the monitor, my heartbeat combed backwards by wind. He wanted to ask, exactly how much has the 21st century taught you to prize convenience as the supreme virtue, but I only said, "I understand." Lasso and Mira came in the late afternoon. Lasso smelled of cool cologne, the cuffs of his white shirt neatly turned, his smile like a handshake. "You scared us," he said, as if scolding a child lost in a supermarket. "Yesterday, the party was unavoidable, I know you understand." Mira was smoother. eBay researched 3 facilities. Private rooms, activity programs, chateaus. They're very good. She said they the way one names a well-reviewed brand. He nodded, the way a polite backdrop does. When they left, Fiona stood at the door with a chart in hand. "Would you like me to call anyone?" she asked. He thought of Linda, my old church friend who taught me how to mix bread dough and how to smile when nobody asks how you are. Then I shook my head. He wanted a little more silence. That night I asked for paper. Fiona brought it at once, her eyebrows parting as if she were nudging open a door without hinges. He set the pen down and everything poured, sudden and hot, like someone had just turned the tap to full. He wrote a long letter to Lasso and Humes. I told them about the Arizona postcard and the empty chair, about the sink water's metallic smell, about the cheap watch and the shiny shoes in which my reflection kept slipping. He told them about needles in my finger, about how I count friends by seasons the way people count migrating birds. He wrote about the 20,000 gone and the 10,000 in my name, about another 20 and 10 that turned into a broken umbrella. I told them about Umi's habit of smoothing the tableclothsage and Lasso's measuring gaze, about dinners with baby kale and premium olive oil, the one place in the house without room for the chicken soup I used to make. He wrote that unconditional love is a one-way avenue as lovely as a boulevard in red leaf season, and that one day you realize Jure standing on the median, watching traffic slide by with no ticket to board. Then I wrote the closing line, my hand shaking so hard I had to stop several times. By the time you read this, I will have left. Don't look for me. Let me be an ordinary woman, not a function. He folded the letter and sealed it. Fiona looked at me like a person who has just unloaded a heavy trunk. Are you okay? She asked. Okay, I said, surprised at the steadiness of my voice. Could you do me a small favor in the morning? She nodded without needing to hear it. At dawn I did what needed doing, signed a stack of papers, paid the bill with a quiet little nest egg of canning company stock they bought back when I worked nights, the rain day money that fell right on the storm. He asked Fiona to give the envelope to my sons when they came. She nodded. He put on the chestnut crewneck knit Mira had recently bought me and, for the first time, felt it was mine. I tied my hair, shrugged into a wool coat frayed at the collar, and took a small suitcase, inside, a leather notebook, a handkerchief embroidered with AC, and the photo of 2 grinning boys at the Lakeview Pier. Hospital hallways smell of disinfectant and toast in the morning. I walked slowly, listening to my soles touch the vinyl like a tiny drum. Fiona walked with me to the elevator and said nothing until the doors were closing. Don't become invisible, she said. Ismail. No. That woman, this woman, is learning to stand at the center of the frame. The doors shut and reflected my face, pale, lined, but strangely bright. The intercity bus station was 3 blocks away. I bought a southbound ticket, not because I knew where I'd end up but because the map over the kiosk showed a straight green line downward that looked like a deep breath. The clerk announced the departure time. I nodded and asked why the machines always used a female voice. Estragd, people trust a calm voice. I thought, yes, all my life I've performed calm so others won't they be afraid. What happens when it's my turn to be afraid? The bus rolled. The city slid off the window like a sweater pulled over the head. Shiny parking lots, billboards changing faster than I could read, tree lines trimmed like orthodontic smiles. Then pasture, black cows like punctuation dots, sun-faded mobile homes. He opened the leather notebook and wrote one line, this is the beginning of day 1. When the bus stopped in a small seaside town, not too crowded, not too empty, I decided to get off. Seabrook is wide enough to get lost in and narrow enough to find your way back. He rented a small second-floor room in an old-style inn, white window frames layered with brushstroke scars. The landlady, Evelyn, handed me a key and said, you look like you need a quiet door. He smiled and said maybe I needed a door that knows how to close. In the afternoon I walked along Main Street. At Cedar Corner stood an old cafe with a weathered wooden sign, Hearth and Tide. Through the glass I saw cracked leather stools, an old espresso machine, a few elderly people sitting still as statues in a winter bus shelter. He pushed the door. The chime gave a soft note. The smell was under-extracted coffee mixed with damp cement. The man behind the counter, Frank, about 50, with stubble and tired eyes. He ordered an Americano. Hot water washed over grounds milled too fine, pulling a fine sourness and a metallic aftertaste. He sipped, set it down, and looked around. Lights hung too high, dead corners, gray walls that made skin look paper pale. Weather called across the TV ticker, small craft advisory until 7 de la tarde. How long has this place been open? He asked. 12 years, he said. Used to be busier. Now everyone orders from apps. I keep it because I don't know what else to do. He said there is always a way for a place to breathe again. Did he think so? Frank gave the generous smile of a tired man. If someone would buy it, they sell. His sentence fell lightly, like a leaf that had been ready a long time. That night, in my room, I did a small sum, $40,000, what I could muster if I gathered all my courage. He called Clara, my cousin who works as a treasurer in Des Moines. Ruth, an old church friend, emailed M.R. Olsen, the fabric shop owner who owed me a favor. Old threads reknit into a thin net, And I, a person who never dared ask anyone for anything, suddenly learned to say, I need help. Americans often say reinvention the way they talk about a new gym membership. But that night, with the far sound of boats bobbing like a long breath, I understood reinvention isn't there molting, it's carefully putting away what can no longer be kept, like clearing the kitchen after Thanksgiving, washing the pans, wrapping leftovers, drying knives, switching off the light. You go to sleep with cinnamon and butter lingering in the air. In the morning you pour coffee and don't call anyone to wake. The next morning I went back to Hearth and Tide. Frank yawned, closed a ledger, and held out his hand. If you're serious, let's talk. We sat by the window where sun slanted in, slicing the dust like a crystal curtain. He talked about a tighter menu, lowering the lights, repainting, trailing plants, a long communal table where strangers could sit close. He talked about soft music and a wooden box for handwritten stories. Frank listened and nodded. 40,000, he said. He nodded. We shook. His palm was rough and warm, mine dry and cool, too straight at touching and setting off a small aftershock just enough to prove I was alive. The keys fell into my coat pocket with a clear chink like glasses touching at a party before anyone is tired. That afternoon I began with a bucket of warm water and a sponge. He wiped each corner of the tables, pulled out chairs, swept under the legs, picked up coffee stirrers dropped in some former season. He bought moss green paint with a name like a northern forest, Evergreen Vale. He replaced the ceiling bulbs with low warm ones, pulled the light down to eye level, swapped curtains for raw linen so sea wind could pass unhindered. He bought small olive trees for the sills, hung a black and white photo of an old woman closing her eyes to smell an espresso, hair tousled like a cloud. He trimmed the menu to 7 items, 4 coffees, 2 warm teas, and 1 house pastry a day. He chalked a sign outside, a room for slow hearts. That evening I sat on the high stool behind the counter and exhaled, my arms aching the way they do after carrying a load through a 5-year corridor. He looked around the room now carrying my breath and saw the dead corners lit like words finally set in their places. He opened my phone. Mensajes piled like eaves now. Lasso, where are you? Please text me. I'm sorry about yesterday. Mira couldn't leave the party. He also, do you need anything? Holmes, ma'am, I read the letter. I was wrong, I know. If you want assisted living because you want it, not because of us, say so. If not, tell me what to do. I read every word and period and felt the spaces between them open into a blank no one yet knew how to fill. He turned off the phone. The day wasn't over, and I didn't want to hand it away. That night I slept on the floor behind the counter with my head on a roll of clean towels. The cafe smelled of freshly wiped wood, not quite dry paint, and salt in the air. Lying on my back watching the yellow bulbs loop the window frame, I understood, I didn't leave them to punish, I left to save someone who was slowly drowning in her own house. Strangely, that person was me. At first light I opened the door, the wind chime whispered. An old gentleman in tweed, a worn fedora, a newspaper in hand, stepped in. Coffee, black, he said, voice gravelly as river stones. I poured and set it down, learning to place a cup like setting a promise. Don't shatter on Jonas morning. He sipped and nodded without looking up. Piano played a refrain soft as the steps of a cat. A middle-aged woman with a brown scarf and slender fingers came after. Her name was June. I think I need a place to sit where no one asks if I'm married, she said half joking, half true. He smiled and pointed to the long table. Their people ask only if they can borrow the salt. The sun climbed like a polished coin. In the glass I saw a woman in a chestnut sweater, hair pinned back, sleep marks on her brow. He recognized myself, and for the first time in years, I didn't turn away. Next morning the sky looked like a linen cloth just shaken off the line, wheat, thin, freckled with mist. Behind the counter I touched the grinder and listened to beans fall onto the blades like small pebbles. The even rhythm calmed me. It lined up the inner chaos. The tweed gentleman returned and laid his paper down, reassured his seat was still his. Juna unfolded her napkin and set down her spoon as if redefining a simple rite. A man around 40, with an old sailor tattoo on his wrist, hesitated at the door before stepping in, like a seasoned swimmer wavering at cold water. I ordered a latte with a packet of sugar. When I handed it over, he looked me straight in the eye and confessed, I just need a place to sit where no one asks if I'm okay yet. I understand, I said. Here the most common question is, top you off. A smiled and dropped a tip in the jar where they taped a note, 4 days harder than usual. People liked that unornamented honesty. The jar filled, not much, but steadily, like eye drops falling at the right time. He started recognizing customers by the details they didn't bother to hide: a widow stroking her napkin like petting a cat, an old lady with fake pearl earrings always choosing backlight so no one could see her wet eyes, a short-haired girl sketching every Sunday afternoon, smiling mouths, hands unsure of where to rest, quietly leaving a drawing on the shelf. He set a wooden box near the counter with chalk words: "Leave what you can't say." Notice piled up, slanting cursive, stiff block letters, the shaky lines of unsteady hands. "I didn't cry today. I missed the smell of his coat. I don't know how to live if I'm not strong anymore." I didn't read them all, but sometimes, when the cafe was empty, I'd lay my palm on them like touching a roosting flock. That helped me through the quiet hours after 9. On the 5th afternoon a man stood in the doorway, broad-shouldered, sleeves rolled, salt and pepper hair. He tipped his beanie and smiled. "Harrison." "He run past here and saw the changes, so I came in." I ordered black coffee. After the first sip he nodded like a craftsman testing a boat he built. "Has the right weight." Then he pointed up at the pendants. "One bulb's loose." He followed his gaze and laughed, sharp eyes. I said he was a carpenter, fixing thresholds, valves, small things people leave alone until they hurt. "Like a thorn in a pillow," he said. I nodded. In a way my cafe was a workshop for removing thorns. The crowd grew in a way you only notice if you sit all day: early walkers in the morning, the liniment smell threading through espresso, a few shop workers at noon, afternoons when slow hearts came, pulling chairs softly as if not to wake a sleeping animal. One Saturday night 3 men over 70 set up an old Chinese chess set and argued whether the rook strutting across the river was arrogant. The next week I placed a long wooden table by the window for the debate club about things no one needs to be right about. They came faithfully to argue with smiles. One morning I arrived early to replace an olive pot gone yellow. Lifting the soil, I smelled damp like heritage, the scent of rains gone by. He thought of my mother who taught me to put wildflowers into empty milk bottles and said, "Not every vase has to be perfect, as long as the water is deep enough." That night I wrote, "The water is deep enough." The texts from Lasso and Hume still came like night rain, unseen, but the streets were wet by morning. He read some, then turned the phone off. Once my thumb started a reply and got as far as "E," then stopped. There is a kind of silence that is violence, there's a kind that is self-rescue. He chose the latter. I hired help, a girl named Nina, 23, weak hands, bright eyes. He taught her how to ask without intruding: "Would you like the door or the quiet corner?" Ella top you off when your cup's 1/3 full. If today's harder than usual, I have a tiny waffle on the house. Nina listened as if to a binding contract. "What do we sell here?" He asked. "Stigrin, we sell not being rushed." He pointed to the scrap behind the counter. "Slowness heals." Nina nodded. On the second afternoon of the third week, a woman around 60 with a neat silver bob and fine wool coat came in. Her voice had an eastern bite, sharp as cold wind. She handed me some flyers: "Shelter for older women facing psychological abuse. We need volunteers." He looked at the corners already bent by staples. "I'm Mrs. Whitaker," she said. "I need a place to post these." He took them, and before my brain could remind me that other people's problems are heavy, my mouth had said, "You can use the long table every Thursday afternoon." I brew extra tea. That night I opened a new bank account named Wildflower Fund. He moved our tiny first week profit into it and taped a note to the espresso machine: "Each cappuccino helps someone have a safe bed." No one asked what safe meant. They read, nodded, and reached for their wallets. Good things travel with bad the way shadows travel with bodies. One rainy afternoon a middle-aged man lurched in, smelling of cheap liquor like an alibi clinging to cloth. I slapped the counter and snarled, "Why is it all old folks and women in here?" Turned the music up. He calmly stopped the grinder and met his eyes. "We keep the rhythm low enough to hear ourselves breathe," I said. He sneered, swore, and turned, sloshing a hot tea onto Huna's table. He brought towels, apologized to June. Nina stood behind me gripping her apron. He said to the man, "I'll make you an Americano and then you'll go." He paused, started to say something, then curled his lip. "Forget it." I left. When the door shut, my legs shook and my stomach tightened like after crossing a rickety bamboo bridge. Harrison, tightening a chair's foot, set his palm on the counter edge and murmured, "Good boundaries." He nodded and sat for a moment until my heart found the beat. He began to remember less. The commas of the old life faded, the smell of Lasso's jacket, shy laugh. He realized it isn't the love that abandons you first, you abandon the way you love. One night after closing I played a voicemail from Lasso. His voice was tired and slow like someone speaking to himself. "Ma'am, I don't know where to start. I think I measured wrong. I used every ruler except the ones without marks, like the warmth of a person in a room. I'm sorry. Can you show me how to arrive late without arriving too late?" He listened and deleted. Not because I didn't want to keep it, because I was afraid if I saved it, it would become a secondary rhythm inside me again. On a clear morning Fiona called. Ida emailed her my new number in case. "Just wanted to hear you're okay," she laughed, sunlight in the sound. And, they got the letter. It was quite a beat. "They came looking for me," she said. I told them I knew nothing more. Not sure why I felt proud. He laughed and thanked her. Before hanging up she said, "You're in the middle of the frame now." He looked at my reflection in the glass, a woman not young, not dazzling, but standing straight, and agreed. He chalked house rules and hung them by the door. "Uno, we do not hurry. Dos, you don't have to either. Tres, here, quiet is a right. Cuatro, tea will be topped when 1/3 remains. Cinco, if today's harder than usual, say one sentence, today is hard." People photographed the board and posted it somewhere. A week later, someone drove in from Bayfield just to sit under it for an hour. They left a note in the wooden box, "Today is hard." He topped their tea. Sometimes I slid another note under the box, "Tomorrow may be a little easier." Not a promise, a possibility. On a windy night with the sea like a great animal beyond the window, Harrison stayed to help reset the shells. He worked in silence, screws lined in a neat row. "I used to think I'd open my own shop," he said, sanding an edge. "Then my wife got sick, and the plans folded." He didn't ask more. He stroked the walnut as if petting a creature that guards memories. Before leaving he handed me a small box, a bell turned from oak, round handle, clear tone. "For the counter," he said. "Anyone who needs you can ring." He thanked him and set it down. The next day an old woman came in, eyes red, walked to the bell, and touched it lightly. He poured tea and laid a napkin on the table. Scinadi. By month 3 I could tell the cafe was alive. Not in the loud way of spreadsheets but in the garden way. Someone who hurried yesterday now stopped to breathe. June changed her scarf from brown to gray, a gentler color. The tweed gentleman suddenly smiled when a child popped in for a cookie. He started placing a small jar of flowers on each table, not boutique blooms, but dandelions, daisies, sprigs of rosemary stolen from a bush. People sniffed, closed their eyes for a second, and opened them steadier. He thought of my mother. The water is deep enough. Will Flaubert Fund grew slowly. I didn't campaign. I just wrote that each cappuccino contributed 50 cents. The first statement bought 3 thin blankets. By the 4th we paid a month's rent for an old woman evicted because her son gambled. Mrs. Whittaker's weekly circle met. She spoke in an even tone about sleeves hiding bruises. He brewed a 3rd pot of tea, and the shop quieted itself. That night I washed dishes, my shoulders heavy and my heart light. On the anniversary of leaving home, not a date I knew by calendar but by the smell of the wind, I pulled the plastic box from under the bed and sat on the floor, leafing slowly through old photos. Lasso at 11, narrow-chested, staring into the lens as if saying hurry up. Humes at 8, clinging to my arm and looking askance as though listening to some bird. He slid the stack back with a long exhale. Not as painful as they thought. More like discarding an old sweater. You expect to be cold, and somehow there is sun. The next day a sealed envelope appeared in the wooden box, addressed for say. I hesitated and opened it. If you're reading this, eBay found the right cafe and the right door, but maybe you don't want to meet. Sit on the bench outside until the rain stops. If you don't want to come out, let it stop in its own way. Achi. He set the letter down, feeling as if someone had placed a rock on the table and withdrawn, leaving fine dust. He looked through the window. Hume sat on the bench, denim jacket, hair wet, holding a cup from the shop next door, likely so he wouldn't they force me to serve him. Alone, no that stretching moment. Behind me espresso streamed, spoons clicked, someone laughed softly. I turned away, filled a teapot, carried it out. For you, I said, avoiding his name. A looked up, and the brown eyes of the boy swam through deep water. Thank you, he said, Oarse. I set the tray down, went back inside, and closed the door. Behind the counter I gripped the wood and listened to my heart, still steady. Half an hour later, when the rain ended, the bench was empty. The wooden box held a note, "Today is hard." He topped the pot with hot water. That night another voicemail, and I knew whose. "Ma'am, I understand. I won't they break the space you've built to lean in if ever you want, I'm here." He put away the phone and walked to the beach. The tide had begun to ebb, leaving thin seams of light on the sand like Someone's handwriting. Some letters, I thought, are best written with water. After that, people said I seemed brighter. June said my face had less guard. He wasn't they sure. He just knew the cafe kept me at the speed I needed. He hung a small wooden plaque behind the counter, hand-carved by Harrison, "You are allowed to arrive late to your own life." People touched it like a threshold before stepping into the cold. By spring, Hearth and Tide was steady enough to close on Mondays. I spent the day at the farmer's market buying Ivan's sourdough, Marta's goat cheese, the first asparagus still dusty. Some days Harrison drove me in his old pickup over Cedar Ridge to the turnout above the bay. It talked about oaks felled by storms and how they become breathing spaces for little ecologies, moss, mushrooms, insects. A life of wood, he said, doesn't end with the saw. He nodded and thought of myself. That season Wildflower Fund helped 3 women move. Mars Whitaker hugged me, her old perfume like the smell of a hand-loomed blanket. "You do good by selling beverages." He laughed. "I just sell time." She said, "Time in the right place is a kind of money." One June evening Lasso stood at the door. No envelope, no flowers, no preface. His suit didn't they fit a short town, like a bird out of flock. He stood there with hands at his sides, staring at the sign "A Room for Slow Hearts" for a long time. He watched through the glass and felt as if he were any passing customer, someone to be served but not saved. Nina whispered, "Do you?" He said, "Leave it." Lasso came in without looking around and went straight to the counter. "A cappuccino," he said. He made it and set it down as a shared object that belonged to no one. He didn't add a word, just drank. At the long table the Tweed gentleman debated with June whether calling the last course dessert or pudding changed the taste. Harrison fixed a screw at the door, head bowed. When Lasso finished, he put down money and looked at me. "I don't deserve it, you don't need to forgive." He nodded. He exhaled, stepped to the door, paused under the carved sign, placed his hand on the words, and left. No soundtrack, no cutaway. Real life is quieter than films in the exact places where depth lives. That night I sat alone behind the counter with a small lamp, the chairs already still. He poured myself warm milk and remembered the first night I carried feverish Lasso to the ER, his small fingers clenched at my collar. He remembered his voice calling me from an empty basketball court at dusk, "Ma'am," and I remembered the 30-year-old man who left our home with a postcard. He set the cup down and wrote, "I've begun to forgive those who live by rulers low in amino acids. You don't have to invite them into my kitchen." Summer came and the cafe gained a reading nook. He begged used books from the library, worn covers, frayed spines. He taped a note, "Take if you need. When you're done, leave one line." People left sentences like footprints in sand. Kindness is loaned courage. Not happiness, but peace. eBay learned going slow is a skill. I found I'm good at safekeeping words people don't have time to read. One drizzly evening, with rain silvering the eaves and steam fogging the glass, Harrison brought a new frame. "For this Preso Lady photo," he said. "Walnut. I like how it keeps the touch of living." He smiled, "Me too." I stared at the hung picture for a while. "Ever think of opening another place?" He shook my head. "I don't want to say it out loud. I'm afraid it'll break." I nodded, understanding. "One room is enough for one heart," he said. That night a text from an unknown number, Thank you for letting me sit on the porch in the rain. I guessed Diana. Didn't they reply? Some relationships are best served by distance. Oldham returned. Seabrook dressed in yellow and Main Street was strewn with leaves like a handwritten letter needing no sender. He hosted a story hour. Read something Jube written if you like. Hune brought her first poem in 10 years, voice trembling but unbroken. Harrison told of his mother's kitchen table, its surface branded a crescent by an overboiled kettle, and how he carried it through 3 houses and 4 repairs. A young woman spoke about the day she knew she didn't want to be anyone else and how her mother learned to be proud of that. He stood behind the counter polishing a glass already clean, listening to them weave their days. Perhaps I am the invisible weaver, I thought. I provide the loom. On the cafe's 2nd birthday I closed early and chalked the door. Thank you for coming slow with us. Nina brought a small carrot cake. Harrison gave me a frame with the word Wilflower carved in oak. Mars Whitaker arrived late with Agnes and 2 ladies whose names I hadn't learned. They hugged me, perfume mixed with the smell of old wool coats. He put on a piano piece. We sat and ate cake and drank tea and didn't they make speeches. In a quiet pocket I felt tears rise, not from sadness but from belonging. When I locked up, Lasso stood across the street with his hands in his pockets and didn't they cross. Didn't they call out either. We looked at each other through the words A Room for Slow Hearts. He touched my chest to feel the pace, he did the same. He nodded. Sometimes synchronization is a form of apology. He went back to my room, took out the Lakeview photo, laid it on the table, and wrote on the back, "You are allowed to arrive late to your own life." He tucked it into the leather notebook. My phone buzzed. Ume's voicemail, "Mom, I'm learning to tie up what shouldn't fall. They take time." He turned the phone off and smiled. He warmed milk and looked out the window. In the dim streetlight a man walked with a small boy, hand in hand, their shadows long. Night breathe, even and deep. Tomo Rope's list, open up, brew the first pot of tea, change the left-hand olive, answer 3 wildflower emails, write a thank you to no one, practice stopping my hand in time so nothing spills. He switched off the light. My shadow touched the wall like a comma. Not an ending. A pause, long enough to inhale, short enough not to lose the sentence. Beyond the pane, hearth and tide rested like a sleeping heart. I thought of morning, burrs of beans, bread's warm scent, the oak bell, someone ringing, another head lifting. And me, in the center of the frame, with hands that still know how to round a cup of warm milk and set it down so it won't break on Johnny's morning, not even my own. Winter of the 2nd year, the north wind passed through town like a laconic postman, arriving, dropping off the cold, moving on. He learned to pour coffee even as my hands began to tremble early, a fine shiver like a string tuned half a note off. Dr. Carter, the local physician, said it was time's reminder, no need to panic, just listen. He listened and taught Nina how to step into my hands when the rush came. When you shake, I'll slide in, she said with a pilote's certainty. Harrison made a walnut lost and found shelf with a willow basket on it. Ownerly's objects gathered, single orphaned glove, reading glasses, a half-bought birthday card. Above it I hung a little sign, if you belong nowhere, belong here a while. Some days people came to reclaim things, other days they just stood and read the sentence, nodding as if they found something you can't lift. One Monday before opening, Hume stood outside with a paper bag. Through the glass I saw him hesitate like a man relearning how to knock at his stranger's door. He cracked it just enough to keep the cold from the oven. I brought this, he said softly, offering the bag. Inside, a loaf of banana bread still warm, butter and cinnamon wafting like an apology baked through. I learned the recipe. I've been baking for Max, he said, eyes down. I took it, not touching his hand, and set it on the counter. Thank you, I said. A nodded and stepped back. Ma'am, your wildflower fund, if you need accounting, I can help. No meetings. Ella do it remote. Only if you want. Iguada beat. Email, I said. Someone will answer. He understood at once, the road exists, the distance remains. Strandly, that made it easier for both of us to breathe. He opened a dedicated inbox for the fund, Nina checked weekly. Hume sent neat spreadsheets with gentle notes, asking questions in places where the answers boldn't they hurt. He didn't they sign, I marked approved or revisit next month. So may call that cold, I call it dry tinder, enough to light when needed. March brought a rare storm, rain slanting at faces and wind like a train off its tracks. That night Harrison and I stayed at the cafe. We pulled tables to the center, taped the windows, simmered a pot of soup, laid out blankets. At 9 the power snapped. The city vanished, only water, wood and breath. Nina texted keep warm, June said sti de prey, the Tweed gentleman, his name is Arthur, I learned, called to swear they defend the dessert argument to the last even if the roof flew. He laughed in the dark. The storm tore the awning and soaked a corner of the wall, the damp smelled like a bad memory finding the way back. Morning turned the town into a garden of wet objects, snapped limbs, scattered trash, fallen signs, wires snarled like hair after a nightmare. Harrison brought a ladder and climbed like a proud old cat. He patched the awning, braced the corner, replaced tiles. He swept floors, refreshed the vases, brewed a big pot of coffee. Arturo arrived pulling a rusted toolbox. June brought dry towels. MARS, Whitaker phoned 2 women needing beds. I spread blankets on the long table. For noon the shop became an emergency shelter. In, out, everyone had a task, everyone had a chair. In the slow withdrawing of the wind I heard something connect. We had one another, just enough. On the third night, power still fickle, I wrote the fund report by flashlight, 3 hotel nights for 2 soaked grandmothers, new shoes for a second grader, an overdue light bill for a woman named Maura. He remembered her face, high cheekbones, deep black eyes, a voice so small it seemed meant for the cup instead of me. Leaving, she tapped the oak bell, said nothing, and I heard thank you. So many days I laugh at how a cafe stepped from a short poem into a being with an identity, like the smell, Arizon's new shelf lending vanilla, Ivan's sourdough bringing live yeast tang, almonds I roasted a shade too far adding a fine bitterness, Nina misting a squeeze of lemon along the counter. Woven together, they became the scent of hearth and tide. If I ever lose my phone, I told Nina, ella just follow that smell home. That spring Evelyn, the landlady, fell and broke her wrist. He brought dinner, rewrapped the bandage, washed dishes, changed her sheets. While I rehung the curtain, she told me about her ex, not bitter, not longing, like reading a line from town history. He wasn't that bad, she said. He just floated down a different stream. Y nadie. Americans say let it go so easily, but some days letting go is full body labor, loosening each knot, blowing dust off each memory so it won't they fall and bruise your feet. Holmes began to appear as a decent neighbor, email, a forgotten note reading pending invoices, handled, a gift addressed to Wildflower. Lasso I saw less. Once I glimpsed him across the street peeking in without entering. He put his hand to his chest as if checking his pulse, then walked away. He stood behind the counter, not stepping forward, not back. Stay in the middle of the frame, I reminded myself. One May afternoon the door opened and Mira walked in, hair shorter, a check dress, low shoes, her perfume calmer. She stood very straight as if to deliver a speech and then, unexpectedly, dropped her eyes. I'm Mira, she said, as though reintroducing herself to the room. I want to contribute to the fund. Not to buy forgiveness. Just, after a few classes on caregiving I understand why the things I said hurt. He nodded toward the donation box. She slid in an envelope and didn't they ask for a receipt. Before leaving she said, Lasso's practicing putting down the wrong rulers. Is clumsy at it. He smiled without irony. Clumsy is a way to begin. On bright days the cafe opened like a lung. We propped the doors, added porch chairs, set out glasses of lemonade with bruised mint. Children dashed by and stopped at the wooden box, asking, "What's inside?" Things people whisper, I said. They stood on tiptoe to peek and said, I see paper. Yes, and it is a secret, I said. Paper is heavy. They laughed and ran off, their shoes beating the sidewalk like a parade drum of light. One honeygold evening Arthur suddenly toppled as he rose from his chair. The cafe froze a second and then moved like a body that knows what to do. Harrison cradled his head, Nina dialed 911, I pulled a chair away, June held his hand. Arthur gasped, eyes wide. I gripped his fingers and remembered Fiona. It's okay to feel afraid. He said it. A looked at me, his lids fluttered, then clenched my hand like a man grabbing a rope. The ambulance came fast and took him, leaving behind his fedora and a half-done crossword, 2 lines filled in. I tucked the puzzle into the hat and placed it on the lost and found. Next morning Arthur's daughter, Diane, collected it. "That's okay," she said, eyes wet. He told me, "Tell them not to fill in my crossword." He thought of Fiona. I sent her a hand-drawn postcard, a teacup and a soft brush thank you. She replied with a photo of her night shift desk, beside the computer, a jar of wildflowers. "From now on I'll keep blooms here," she wrote, "to remember that every beep beep has a heart under it." Autumn again. Seabrook wore yellow and Main Street scattered with leaves like a letter written by hand. He hosted an afternoon of reading. Whoever wanted could read something of their own. June brought the first poems they'd written in a decade, her voice trembling but unbroken. Harrison told the story of his mother's kitchen table, the wood burned into a crescent by an overboiled kettle, and how he carried it through 3 homes and 4 repairs. A young woman read about the day she knew she didn't want to be anyone else and how her mother learned to be proud. He stood behind the counter, drawing a glass already dry, listening to them weave their days. Perhaps I'm the invisible weaver, I thought. I lent them the loom. On the cafe's 2nd anniversary I closed early and chalked the door. "Thank you for coming slow with us." Nina brought a small carrot cake. Harrison hung a carved oak wildflower. Mrs. Whitaker arrived late with Agnes and 2 other women. They hugged me. Perfume and old wool mingled. He played a piano track and we sat and ate cake and drank tea, no speeches. In a hush I felt tears, not from sadness but from belonging. That night, locking the door, I saw Lasso across the street with his hands in his coat pockets, not crossing. He didn't take call. We looked at each other through the sign. He touched my chest to find the pace, he did too. He nodded. Sometimes keeping time together is an apology. He returned to my room, took out the Lakeview photo, laid it on the table, and wrote on the back, "You are allowed to arrive late to your own life." He clipped it into the leather notebook. The phone buzzed. "Chums, Mom, I'm learning to tie up what shouldn't they fall. It will take time." He turned off the phone and smiled. He warmed milk and looked out. Under the soft streetlight, a man walked with a little boy hand in hand, their shadows long. Night breathed, even and deep. My plan for tomorrow: open up, pour the first pot of tea, change the left-hand olive, answer 3 wildflower emails, write a thank you to no one, practice stopping my hand in time so nothing spills. He switched off the light. My shadow touched the wall like a comma. Not an ending. A pause, long enough to inhale, short enough not to lose the sentence. Beyond the pane, hearth and tide rested like a sleeping heart. I thought of morning, burrs of beans, bread's warm scent, the oak bell, someone ringing, another head lifting, and me, in the center of the frame, with hands that still know how to round a cup of warm milk and set it down so it won't break on Jonas morning, not even my own.